The train whistle pierced the autumn air as it pulled into the dusty station of Clifton, Arizona Territory, in 1885. Zachary Vance clutched the letter in his hand, the paper worn thin from countless readings over the past 3 months. His heart pounded against his ribs as he scanned the small crowd disembarking from the train. According to her last correspondence, Violet Sullivan would be arriving today, the woman who had agreed to be his wife, sight unseen. The last passengers were stepping onto the platform when Zachary spotted her. She stood alone, one gloved hand clutching a small valise, the other pressed against her forehead. Even from a distance, he could see she was swaying slightly, her face unnaturally flushed despite the cool October breeze. Something was wrong. Zachary pushed through the crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders making it easy to navigate the sea of travelers. As he approached her, Violet's eyes, a startling shade of green, locked with his for just a moment before rolling back. Her knees buckled beneath her full skirts, and Zachary lunged forward, catching her before she hit the wooden planks of the platform. "Miss Sullivan," he said urgently, feeling the alarming heat radiating from her body even through her traveling clothes. "Miss Sullivan, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze unfocused. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak, "I apologize for the poor first impression." Zachary's weathered face creased with concern. "You're burning up with fever, Miss Sullivan. We need to get you to a doctor right away." "No doctors," she murmured before her eyes closed again. "Just need rest." People were beginning to stare, and Zachary made a quick decision. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised at how light she felt, and nodded to the station master to grab her valise. "I am taking my intended home," he explained gruffly to the curious onlookers. "She's taken ill from the journey." The ride back to his ranch was tense. Zachary had borrowed Dr. Miller's wagon for the day, expecting to take his new bride home in relative comfort. Now, he drove the horses harder than he intended, one arm wrapped around Violet's trembling form to keep her from falling off the seat. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow and quick. When they finally arrived at his modest ranch house, 5 miles outside of Clifton, Zachary carried her straight to the bedroom he had prepared for her. The room was simple but clean, with fresh linens on the bed and wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, his attempt to make the place welcoming for his new bride. He laid her gently on the bed and hurried to the kitchen to heat water. As he worked, his mind raced with worry and confusion. This wasn't how he had imagined meeting his mail-order bride. In her letters, Violet had seemed so vibrant, intelligent, and practical, a Boston schoolteacher seeking a new life in the West after losing her parents. Her photograph, which he kept in his shirt pocket, showed a woman with a serious expression but unmistakable beauty in her delicate features. Now she lay in his home, burning with fever, and Zachary realized he knew nothing about caring for a sick woman. Dr. Miller was away in Tucson for the week, and the nearest neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, lived 3 miles away. When he returned to the bedroom with a basin of cool water and clean cloths, Violet was thrashing restlessly on the bed. Her dark hair escaped from its pins and spread across the pillow. "Please," she whimpered, her eyes still closed. "Father, please don't make me marry him." Zachary froze, the basin nearly slipping from his hands. Was she delirious, or had she been forced to answer his advertisement against her will? He set the water down and approached the bed cautiously. "Miss Sullivan," he said softly, "you're safe now. No one is forcing you to do anything." Her eyes opened, fever bright but suddenly lucid. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, "I came of my own accord, I assure you. The fever, it brings back old memories." Relief washed over him. He dipped a cloth in the cool water, wrung it out, and gently placed it on her forehead. "Try to rest. I will take care of you." "My things," she said weakly. "In my valise. There's a small blue bottle. Medicine." Zachary found her valise and opened it, careful to respect her privacy as much as possible as he searched for the bottle. Beneath neatly folded clothing and a well-worn Bible, he found a blue glass bottle with a paper label marked "for fevers and chills." He measured a spoonful as directed on the label and helped Violet to sit up enough to swallow it. Her hand clutched his arm as she sank back onto the pillows. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am sorry to be such a burden on our first meeting." "You're no burden," he replied, surprised by how much he meant it. "Rest now. We will have plenty of time to get acquainted once you're well." Throughout that long night, Zachary tended to Violet with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. He changed the cool compress on her forehead whenever it grew warm, helped her sip water when she was awake enough to swallow, and administered another dose of her medicine when the appropriate time had passed. When her fever spiked dangerously high near midnight, he bathed her flushed face and wrists with cool water, murmuring reassurances in a voice grown hoarse with worry. At one point, she began to shiver violently, and he tucked extra blankets around her, his calloused hands moving with surprising tenderness. In her delirium, Violet spoke of many things: her childhood in Boston, her years teaching school, her fears about coming west to marry a stranger. Zachary listened to it all, gathering these fragments of her life like precious stones, forming a picture of the woman he had agreed to marry. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" he asked softly during one of her more lucid moments, not expecting a real answer. To his surprise, her eyes focused on his face. "Your letter," she whispered. "You wrote of wanting a partner, not just a wife. You spoke of books and the beauty of the desert. You seemed kind." Her words touched something deep inside him. When he had placed the advertisement for a bride, after 10 years of solitude on his ranch, he had not expected to find someone who would see past his rough exterior to the man beneath. As dawn broke over the Arizona landscape, painting the bedroom walls with soft, golden light, Violet's fever finally broke. Her breathing grew deeper and more regular, and the unnatural flush began to fade from her cheeks. Zachary, who had not left her side except to tend the fire or fetch fresh water, felt exhaustion settle over him like a heavy blanket. He slumped in the chair beside her bed, his head nodding forward as sleep claimed him at last. When he woke, the sun was high in the sky, and Violet Sullivan was watching him from the bed, her green eyes clear and alert for the first time since her arrival. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," she said softly. "Or perhaps I should say good afternoon." Zachary straightened abruptly, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Weak as a kitten, but the fever is gone." Her gaze held his steadily. "You stayed with me all night." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "You were very ill." "Thank you," she said simply. Not many men would have shown such care to a stranger. "We're not strangers," he replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Not after last night." A faint blush colored her pale cheeks. "Did I speak much during my fever?" Zachary hesitated, then nodded. "You spoke of Boston, your teaching, your parents." "Oh dear," she murmured, looking embarrassed. "Nothing that would make me think less of you," he assured her. "Only things that helped me understand you better." Violet relaxed slightly against the pillows. "Nevertheless, this is hardly the way I imagined our first meeting." "Nor I," Zachary admitted with a small smile. "But here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, her eyes taking in his tall frame, the strong lines of his face softened by fatigue and concern. "Mr. Vance, Zachary," he interrupted gently. "Please call me Zachary. After all, we are to be married." A shadow crossed her face. About that, you should know that I will understand completely if you wish to reconsider our arrangement. I arrived ill. I have been nothing but trouble, and you have had no opportunity to determine if I am suitable as a wife." Zachary studied her for a long moment, taking in her delicate features, the intelligence in her eyes, and the quiet dignity with which she offered him a way out of their agreement. "Miss Sullivan," he said finally, "I placed an advertisement for a bride because I was looking for a woman of character and courage. I believe I have found her." The smile that illuminated her face then was worth every hour of the sleepless night he had spent at her side. "Now," he continued, standing with a stretch, "you need to eat something. I'll prepare some broth." "You cook as well?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "A man living alone for 10 years learns to feed himself or starve," he replied with a wry smile. "Rest. I'll return shortly." In the kitchen, Zachary moved with the efficiency of long practice, lighting the stove and setting a pot of chicken broth to warm. He had prepared it the day before, anticipating Violet's arrival, though he had imagined serving it at a proper welcome dinner, not as invalid food. As he worked, he reflected on the strange turn of events. When he had sent for a bride, he had been seeking companionship, someone to share the loneliness of his life and help with the running of the ranch. What he hadn't expected was the fierce protectiveness he had felt watching over Violet during her illness, or the way his heart had lightened when she smiled at him. When he returned to the bedroom with a tray bearing a bowl of broth and some soft bread, Violet had managed to sit up against the pillows. She had also attempted to smooth her tangled hair, though without much success. "I must look a fright," she said, self-consciously touching the dark strands. "You look like a woman who has fought a fever and won," he replied, setting the tray carefully across her lap. "That's something to be proud of, not embarrassed about." Her fingers brushed against his as she took the spoon, and he felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. "Thank you for the broth," she said. "It smells wonderful." Zachary sat in the chair beside the bed as she ate, answering her questions about the ranch and Clifton. She listened attentively, her eyes bright with interest despite her weakened state. "How many acres do you have?" she asked between careful sips of broth. 160, he replied. "Not the biggest spread in the territory, but the land is good. There's a creek that runs year-round, even in the dry season, which makes all the difference for the cattle. And you manage it all alone." "I hire hands during roundup and branding, but otherwise, yes." He hesitated, then added, "It's one of the reasons I decided to seek a wife. The work never ends, and I found myself wanting someone to share it with." Violet nodded thoughtfully. "In your letters, you mentioned a garden." "Yes," he said, surprised she remembered that detail. "Behind the house. Nothing fancy, but it produces well enough. Vegetables mostly, though there's a small orchard of apple trees that the previous owner planted. I would like to see it when I'm stronger," she said. "I've always loved gardens, though I had little opportunity for more than window boxes in Boston." "You'll have plenty of space here," Zachary promised, "though gardening in Arizona is different from what you might be used to. The sun is fiercer, the rain less reliable." "Then I shall have to learn," she said with quiet determination, "just as I will need to learn many things to be a proper rancher's wife." "There's time," he assured her. "First, you need to recover your strength." After she finished the broth, Zachary took the tray and suggested she rest more. Violet nodded, her eyelids already growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert. "Will you tell me more about yourself when I wake?" she asked as he turned to leave. "Your letters were informative about the ranch, but I know so little about Zachary Vance the man." He paused in the doorway, touched by her interest. "If that's what you wish." "It is," she murmured, her eyes drifting closed. "After all, I've come all this way to marry you. I should at least know what books you enjoy." Zachary smiled as she fell asleep, her breathing deep and regular, no longer troubled by fever. He had written to her of books, it was true, but had not expected a mail-order bride to take much notice of such things. Perhaps Violet Sullivan would surprise him in more ways than one. The next few days established a quiet routine. Violet's strength returned gradually, and Zachary divided his time between ranch work and caring for his convalescing bride-to-be. Each day, he would bring her meals, help her to the sitting room when she felt strong enough, and in the evenings, they would talk. Violet proved to be an excellent listener, drawing him out with thoughtful questions. He found himself telling her things he had not spoken of in years: his childhood in Pennsylvania, his journey west as a young man, the struggles of his early years in Arizona. "What made you leave Pennsylvania?" she asked on the third evening as they sat in the small but comfortable sitting room. She was wrapped in a quilt despite the fire burning in the hearth, still prone to chills in the aftermath of her fever. Zachary was silent for a long moment, considering how much to share. "The war," he said finally. "I fought for the Union. When I came home, everything felt different. Smaller somehow. Or maybe I was the one who had changed." Violet nodded, her eyes compassionate. "My father was in the war as well. He was never the same afterward, though he rarely spoke of it." "Some things are better not spoken of," Zachary said quietly, "but the war made me restless. I wanted open spaces, room to breathe. When I heard about the Homestead Act, it seemed like the answer." "Was it difficult establishing the ranch?" "The first few years were brutal," he admitted. "Drought, cattle rustlers, loneliness. More than once I thought about giving up, heading back east with my tail between my legs. But something kept me here. The land gets under your skin after a while." "I think I understand that," Violet said. "Even in the short time I've been here, there's something about the vastness of it all that speaks to me. It's so different from Boston with its crowded streets and tall buildings." "Do you miss it?" "The city," she considered the question carefully. "I miss certain aspects: the libraries, the bookshops, the concerts. But Boston held too many painful memories after my parents died, and my position at the school became complicated." Something in her tone made Zachary curious, but he didn't press for details. Instead, he asked, "What made you decide to become a mail-order bride? An educated woman like yourself must have had other options." Violet's fingers toyed with the edge of the quilt. "Women's options are more limited than you might think, even with an education. I could continue teaching, of course, but the school board made it clear that they expected their female teachers to remain unmarried and devote their lives entirely to their pupils." "You wanted a family of your own," Zachary said, understanding dawning. "Yes," she admitted. "Though that wasn't all. There was a certain board member, a widower named Mr. Blackwell, who took an unwelcome interest in me." Zachary felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "Did he know?" she assured him quickly. "Nothing like that, but his attentions were persistent and unwanted. When I refused his proposal, he made my position at the school increasingly difficult." "So you decided to marry a stranger in Arizona territory instead?" Zachary said, a note of disbelief in his voice. Violet met his gaze directly. "I decided to take control of my own destiny." "Your advertisement spoke of wanting a partner, not a servant or a decoration. Your letters revealed a man of intelligence and decency. I chose you, Mr. Vance, as much as you chose me." Her words affected him deeply, stirring emotions he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "Zachary," he reminded her gently. "Please call me Zachary." "Zachary," she echoed, a small smile playing at her lips. "And you must call me Violet." The next morning, Violet insisted on getting properly dressed and joining him for breakfast at the table. She appeared in the kitchen wearing a simple blue dress, her dark hair neatly arranged in a bun at the nape of her neck. Though still pale, she moved with growing confidence. "You look well," Zachary said, pulling out a chair for her at the sturdy oak table he had crafted himself years ago. "I feel much improved," she replied, her eyes taking in the kitchen with interest. It was a practical space, clean but sparsely furnished, with a large iron stove, open shelving holding dishes and cookware, and a window overlooking the yard. "I thought perhaps today, if you feel strong enough, I might show you around the ranch," Zachary suggested as he placed a plate of eggs and biscuits before her. "Just the house and nearby buildings for now." Violet's face brightened. "I would like that very much. I have been curious to see more than the bedroom and sitting room." After breakfast, he offered her his arm, and they stepped outside into the clear morning light. Violet inhaled deeply, appreciating the crisp air and the scent of sage that permeated the landscape. The ranch house stood on a gentle rise, offering a view of the surrounding terrain. To the west, rocky hills rose against the sky, while to the east and south the land rolled away in a patchwork of pasture and scrubland. A corral and barn stood nearby, and beyond them, Zachary pointed out the bunkhouse where the seasonal hands stayed during busy times. "It's beautiful," Violet said, her eyes taking in the vastness of the sky and the subtle colors of the desert landscape. "Different from what I imagined, but beautiful." "What did you imagine?" Zachary asked curiously. "Something harsher, I suppose, more barren." She gestured toward a cluster of wildflowers growing near the porch. "But there's so much life here if you know where to look for it." Zachary smiled, pleased by her perception. "That's the secret of the desert. It only seems empty to those who don't take the time to see what's really there." He showed her the barn next, introducing her to the horses his own mount, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, and the gentler mare he had purchased with her in mind. "This is Daisy," he said as the chestnut mare stretched her neck over the stall door, nostrils flaring with interest at the newcomer. "I bought her in town last month, thinking you might like to ride once you're settled." Violet reached out hesitantly to stroke the mare's soft muzzle. "She's lovely. I should warn you, though, that my riding experience is limited to a few lessons in the city parks." "She's patient and forgiving," Zachary assured her. "The perfect mount for learning desert riding. When you're fully recovered, I'll teach you." The garden behind the house was their next stop. Though October had brought cooler temperatures, there were still tomatoes ripening on the vine, along with squash, peppers, and a variety of herbs. "Oh," Violet exclaimed, her face alight with pleasure. "This is wonderful, much more extensive than you described in your letters." Zachary felt a rush of pride at her approval. "The soil near the creek is good, and I've had 10 years to work on it. The previous owner left little but weeds. These herbs," she said, bending to examine a fragrant patch of greenery. "Rosemary, thyme, sage. You use these in your cooking." "When I remember to," he admitted. "I'm a simple cook, I'm afraid, practical rather than inspired." Violet straightened, a determined expression on her face. "Well, I may not know much about ranching yet, but I do know my way around a kitchen. Perhaps we can combine our skills." Zachary was struck by how naturally she spoke of their future together, as if her place at his side was already established in her mind. It gave him a curious feeling of warmth and anticipation. "I would like that," he said simply. As they completed their tour, Zachary noticed that Violet's steps were growing slower, her face paler with fatigue. "You've done enough for your first day up," he said, guiding her back toward the house. "You need to rest." For once, she didn't argue, which told him more than words how tired she truly was. Once inside, he settled her on the sofa in the sitting room with a quilt and insisted she rest while he attended to some chores. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Please don't neglect your work on my account." "I'll just check on the cattle in the north pasture," he promised. "I won't be gone long." As he rode out, Zachary found himself thinking about the way Violet had looked at his home, not with disappointment or dismay, as he had half feared, but with genuine interest and appreciation. She had seen the beauty in the landscape that many Easterners missed, and the potential in the garden that he had created. For the first time since she had arrived feverish and ill at the train station, he allowed himself to imagine what their life together might truly be like. Not just a practical arrangement between two lonely people, but a partnership that could grow into something more meaningful. The thought both excited and terrified him. When he returned to the house a few hours later, he found Violet still on the sofa but sitting up with one of his books open on her lap. She looked up as he entered, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I hope you don't mind," she said, holding up the volume of poetry. "I found your bookshelf while you were out." "Of course I don't mind," he replied, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Books are meant to be read." "Wordsworth," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "I wouldn't have guessed." Zachary felt suddenly self-conscious about his modest collection of books. "My mother was fond of poetry. She taught me to read with those verses." "She chose well," Violet said warmly. "Nature never did betray the heart that loved her. You know the poem." "I taught literature as well as arithmetic," she reminded him. "Though I will admit, Wordsworth's appreciation of nature makes more sense to me now, seeing this landscape, than it ever did in a Boston classroom." Zachary sat in the armchair across from her, struck by how right she looked in his home, with the afternoon sun streaming through the window behind her, illuminating the rich chestnut tones in her dark hair. "What else did you teach?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Reading, writing, history, basic sciences," she replied. "The school board believed in a comprehensive education, even for the children of laborers and immigrants. You must miss teaching." Violet closed the book carefully, considering his words. "I miss the children," she said finally. "Their curiosity, their perspectives. Even the troublemakers had something to offer." She paused, then added more softly, "But I won't miss the constraints of the position, or the loneliness of returning to an empty room each night." Her candor touched him. "There are children in Clifton who could benefit from a good teacher," he said. "Once we're settled, if you wish to offer lessons, I wouldn't object." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a warm smile. "That's very generous, Zachary." Most husbands would expect their wives to focus solely on home duties. "I didn't advertise for a traditional wife," he reminded her. "I asked for a partner. Your education and experience are assets, not inconveniences." The look she gave him then made his heart beat a little faster, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. "Speaking of home duties," she said after a moment, changing the subject, "I feel well enough to help with dinner tonight. Nothing strenuous, but perhaps I could make biscuits to accompany whatever you had planned." "Are you certain you're up to it?" "Absolutely," she assured him. "I've been resting all day and I'm feeling much stronger. Besides, I need to begin pulling my weight around here." Zachary wanted to tell her that she didn't need to prove anything, that her recovery was more important than any contribution she could make to the household, but he recognized the determination in her eyes. She needed to feel useful, to establish her place in this new life. "Biscuits would be welcome," he said instead. "I was planning a simple stew with the last of the summer vegetables." They worked together in the kitchen, moving around each other with a growing ease that surprised them both. Violet mixed the biscuit dough with practiced hands while Zachary prepared the stew, adding herbs from the garden at her suggestion. The domesticity of the scene struck him as they sat down to eat, the woman across from him at his table, the home-cooked meal they had prepared together, the gentle conversation. For 10 years, he had eaten his meals in solitude, with only his thoughts for company. The change was profound. "This is delicious," Violet said, tasting the stew. "The herbs make all the difference." "Your biscuits are perfect," he replied, breaking one open to reveal a light, fluffy interior. "Better than any I've managed to make." She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet kitchen. "A fair division of labor, then. You grow the herbs, I'll bake the biscuits." "A partnership," he said, echoing his earlier words, and saw her expression soften. "Yes," she agreed. "A partnership." After dinner, as Violet insisted on helping with the dishes despite his protests, she asked the question that had been on both their minds since her arrival. "Zachary, about our wedding." He stilled, a plate in his hands. "Yes. I know the original plan was to marry soon after my arrival, but given the circumstances." She hesitated, then continued. "I think perhaps we should take some time to become better acquainted first, if you agree, of course." Relief washed over him, though he was careful not to let it show too plainly. "I think that's wise," he said. "There's no rush, we should both be certain." "Exactly," she said, looking relieved as well. "Not that I've changed my mind," she added quickly. "I simply believe we should approach this important decision with clear heads." "And fully recovered bodies," he added with a small smile. "I agree completely, Violet. We'll wait until you're stronger and we've had time to know each other better." The decision made, they finished the dishes in companionable silence. Later, as they sat in the sitting room, she with her poetry, he with the ranch accounts he needed to review, Zachary reflected on how quickly his solitary life had been transformed by the arrival of this woman. A week ago, he had been alone, preparing for the arrival of a stranger who would become his wife out of practical necessity. Now, he found himself hoping that when they did marry, it would be for reasons beyond mere convenience or loneliness. The thought should have frightened him, but instead, he felt a curious peace settle over him as he watched Violet turn the pages of Wordsworth's poems, her expression absorbed and serene. Perhaps, he thought, this unexpected beginning, her illness, his care, their agreement to wait, was exactly what they needed to build something genuine between them. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Zachary was checking the corral fence when he heard the sound of an approaching wagon. He straightened, shading his eyes against the morning sun, and recognized Mrs. Patterson's ancient buckboard coming up the drive. Ella Patterson was the widow of one of the original settlers in the area, a formidable woman in her 60s who ran her own small ranch with the help of her grown sons. She was also the closest thing to a Dr. Clifton had when Dr. Miller was away. "Morning, Zachary," she called as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "Word reached me that your mail-order bride arrived sick as a dog. Thought I'd come see if you needed any help." Zachary helped her down from the wagon, noting the basket covered with a checkered cloth that she carried. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Patterson. She's doing much better now. The fever broke several days ago." "Good to hear, but I'll just check on her myself if you don't mind." Her tone made it clear that his opinion on the matter was purely incidental. A man alone can't be expected to know how to properly care for an ailing woman. Before he could respond, the front door of the house opened, and Violet appeared on the porch, looking curious. She had dressed in a simple green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair neatly arranged. "Oh," she said, spotting the visitor. "Good morning. Miss Sullivan, I presume," Mrs. Patterson said, marching toward the porch with her basket. "I'm Ella Patterson from the Double P Ranch. Heard you were sick, so I brought chicken soup and corn bread." Violet looked momentarily taken aback by the older woman's direct approach, but recovered quickly. "How very kind of you, Mrs. Patterson. Please come in." Zachary followed the women into the house, amused and slightly concerned about what Mrs. Patterson might say. The widow was known for speaking her mind, regardless of social niceties. His concerns proved well-founded when, after examining Violet with a critical eye and pronouncing her on the mend but still too skinny by half, Mrs. Patterson settled at the kitchen table and fixed Zachary with a stern look. "Now then, young man, where are you sleeping while this poor girl recovers in your bedroom?" Zachary felt his face grow warm. "The sofa in the sitting room, madam." "HMPH," Mrs. Patterson grunted, though she looked marginally appeased. "And when's the wedding to be?" "We've decided to wait a while," Violet interjected smoothly, pouring coffee for their guest, "until I'm fully recovered and we've had time to become better acquainted." Mrs. Patterson's shrewd eyes moved between them. "Sensible," she said finally. "Though you'll need to make it official before too long, or tongues will wag in town." "We're aware of proprieties, Mrs. Patterson," Zachary assured her, his voice firmer than usual. "But Miss Sullivan's health and comfort come first." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Well, that's as it should be." She turned to Violet. "You picked a decent one, miss. Zachary Vance has been the most honorable rancher in these parts since he arrived. Works hard, deals fair, keeps to himself mostly." "I'm discovering that," Violet replied with a warm glance at Zachary that made his chest tighten strangely. Mrs. Patterson stayed for nearly an hour, during which she managed to extract most of Violet's life history, while simultaneously imparting a wealth of information about Clifton and its inhabitants. "The town's growing," she informed them as she prepared to leave. "Got a proper school now, though the teacher's a young man fresh from back east who looks like he'll blow away in the first strong wind. Church is led by Pastor Wilson Goodman, though his sermons run long. General stores owned by the Fletcher family, fair prices, but watch that they don't sell you last year's goods." "Thank you for the information," Violet said sincerely. "It helps to know something about the community." "You'll meet them all soon enough," Mrs. Patterson promised. "Once you're properly on your feet, you should come to Sunday service. Nothing like a church social to introduce a newcomer." After she had departed, leaving behind her basket of food and a standing invitation to visit the Double P, Zachary and Violet exchanged amused glances. "She's quite a character," Violet observed. "That she is," Zachary agreed. "But she's also the most reliable neighbor I've ever had. When my first winter here nearly wiped me out, she showed up with seed stock and enough supplies to get me through until spring. She seems to think highly of you." Zachary shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "She judges a man by his actions, not his words. I try to live up to that standard." Violet studied him thoughtfully. "You're not what I expected, Zachary Vance." "Is that good or bad?" he asked, half joking, half serious. "Good," she said softly. "Definitely good." The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Each morning, Zachary would rise early to tend to the essential ranch work, returning to the house for breakfast with Violet, who insisted on taking over the cooking as her strength returned. After breakfast, he would return to his chores while she explored the house, reading, resting, or working on small domestic tasks that wouldn't overtax her recovering body. They would meet again for the midday meal, and in the afternoons, if she felt strong enough, he would show her more of the ranch, the creek that provided their water, the best views of the surrounding countryside, the small orchard of apple trees now heavy with ripening fruit. In the evenings, they would prepare dinner together and then sit in the sitting room, talking or reading, getting to know each other in a way that would never have been possible if they had married immediately as planned. Zachary discovered that Violet had a quiet wit that emerged more frequently as she became comfortable with him. She was well-read and thoughtful, with strong opinions that she expressed with a combination of conviction and diplomacy that he admired. Violet, in turn, found herself drawn to Zachary's quiet strength and unexpected depth. He spoke little of himself, but his actions revealed his character, his gentleness with animals, his respect for the land, his unwavering commitment to his word. When he did speak of his past, of the war and his journey west, she sensed the resilience it had taken for him to build this life alone. A week after Mrs. Patterson's visit, Violet declared herself well enough to venture into town. "I feel perfectly recovered," she insisted when Zachary expressed concern. "And I need to see Clifton properly, not just from a fever haze as we pass through." "If you're certain," he agreed, trying to hide his nervousness about introducing her to the townsfolk. "We can go tomorrow. I need supplies anyway." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect October day. Violet dressed carefully in her best traveling dress, a deep blue wool that flattered her fair complexion, and arranged her hair with extra attention. Zachary, too, had made an effort with his appearance. He wore a clean shirt under his best vest, had trimmed his beard and polished his boots until they shone. "You look very handsome," Violet said when he helped her into the wagon, a hint of shyness in her voice that he found endearing. "And you look beautiful," he replied, meaning it completely. The sickness that had marred her arrival was gone, replaced by a healthy glow that enhanced her natural loveliness. The ride to Clifton took just under an hour. As they approached, Violet leaned forward eagerly, taking in the dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, the church steeple rising above the rooftops, and the scattered houses spreading out from the town center. "It's larger than I expected," she commented. "It's grown in the 10 years I've been here," Zachary replied. "The copper mines brought in workers and businesses. It's still small compared to eastern cities, but it has most of what we need." He guided the wagon down the main street, pointing out landmarks: the general store, the small bank, the doctor's office, the schoolhouse at the edge of town. Violet absorbed it all with keen interest. "And where is the church Mrs. Patterson mentioned?" "Just ahead on the corner. Service is at 10 on Sundays, followed by a social gathering if the weather permits." "Perhaps we could attend this Sunday," she suggested. "If you don't mind, that is. It would be a good way to meet people." Zachary nodded, though the thought of the inevitable curious stares and questions made him uncomfortable. "If you feel up to it." They stopped first at the general store, where Zachary needed to purchase supplies. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and Mr. Fletcher, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers, looked up from behind the counter. "Zachary Vance," he exclaimed. "Twice in 1 month must be some kind of record." His curious gaze moved to Violet. "And this must be your bride from back east we've been hearing about." Zachary performed the introductions, noting how Violet's natural grace put the shopkeeper at ease. Within minutes, she was engaged in conversation with Mrs. Fletcher, who had emerged from the back room at the sound of new voices. As they gathered the supplies they needed: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for Zachary's rifle, and a few yards of calico that Violet selected for curtains, more townspeople happened to enter the store. Each was introduced to Violet, who met their barely concealed curiosity with polite charm. Zachary observed with quiet pride how well she handled herself. There were no airs about her, despite her education, no obvious discomfort with the frontier setting. She spoke easily with the miners' wives, showed genuine interest in the schoolteacher who stopped in, and even managed to draw a smile from stern-faced Pastor Wilson when he mentioned that they hoped to attend Sunday services. By the time they left the store, loaded with supplies and promises to return soon, Zachary suspected that Violet Sullivan had already won over half the town. "That wasn't so bad," she said as they headed toward the doctor's office, where Zachary wanted to check if Dr. Miller had returned. "You were wonderful," he told her honestly. "Though I think Mrs. Fletcher will be disappointed when she learns we haven't set a wedding date yet." Violet laughed. She wasn't exactly subtle with her questions, was she? I think she was trying to determine if I was already expecting. Zachary nearly choked at her frankness. I apologize if that made you uncomfortable." "It didn't," she assured him, her expression serious now. "I understand their curiosity. A mail-order bride who arrives ill, stays at a bachelor's ranch without immediate marriage, it's natural they would wonder. Still, it's not their business," he said firmly. "Perhaps not, but small towns run on gossip. It's better to face it directly than hide away." She placed her hand lightly on his arm. "I'm not ashamed of our arrangement, Zachary. Are you?" "Of course not," he replied immediately. "I just don't want you subjected to wagging tongues." Her smile was warm. "I faced worse in Boston. At least here the curiosity seems largely good-natured." The doctor's office was locked, with a note on the door indicating that Dr. Miller would return in 2 days. Zachary made a mental note to bring Violet back then for a proper checkup. Their last stop was the small cafe that served as Clifton's only restaurant. Zachary had promised Violet lunch in town before they returned to the ranch, and despite his growing weariness with the constant greetings and introductions, he intended to keep that promise. The cafe was busy with the midday crowd, but they found a small table near the window. The owner, a cheerful woman named Rose who had come west from New Orleans, greeted them enthusiastically. "Miss Sullivan, we've all been dying to meet you," she said, her accent adding a musical quality to her words. "And looking mighty healthy for someone who arrived at death's door, if the stories are to be believed." "The stories are exaggerated," Violet replied with a smile. "I had a fever, nothing more serious. Mr. Vance took excellent care of me, did he now?" Rose winked at Zachary, who felt his ears grow warm. "Well, good for him. Now, what can I get you too? The beef stew is fresh today, and I've just baked apple pie." They ordered, and as they waited for their food, Violet looked around the cafe with interest. The walls were decorated with framed photographs of Clifton in its earlier days, showing the gradual growth from a tiny mining camp to a proper town. "It's fascinating to see the history," she commented. "To think of the courage it took for people to come here and build lives in such a remote place." "Like you," Zachary said, the words escaping before he could consider them. Violet looked surprised, then pleased. "I suppose so, though I had the advantage of arriving when the town was already established. The true pioneers were here decades ago." "It still takes courage to leave everything familiar behind," he insisted. "To travel across the country to marry a stranger." She studied him thoughtfully. "Are we still strangers, Zachary?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he said after a moment. "I don't believe we are." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes. "I don't think so either." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of their food, but Zachary found himself returning to her question throughout the meal. It was true in the space of less than 2 weeks, Violet Sullivan had ceased to be a stranger to him. She had become, what? A friend, certainly. A companion. Perhaps something more, something he wasn't quite ready to name. As they ate, more townspeople stopped by their table to introduce themselves or simply to stare. Zachary found himself growing protective, noting when Violet's responses became slightly less animated, her posture more rigid. "We should head back soon," he said quietly after they had finished their meal. "You're getting tired." She gave him a grateful look. Is it that obvious? Only to me, he assured her. You're still recovering your strength. The return journey to the ranch was quieter, both of them processing the day's events. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Zachary heard Violet sigh softly beside him. "Is something wrong?" he asked, concerned. "No," she said, her expression peaceful as she gazed at the modest house and outbuildings. It feels good to come home." The word sent a jolt through him. Home. In 2 weeks, she had come to think of their ranch as home. "Yes," he agreed, his voice rougher than usual with emotion. "It does." The following Sunday, they attended church services in Clifton as planned. Pastor Wilson's sermon was indeed long, as Mrs. Patterson had warned, but Violet found it thoughtful and well constructed. Zachary, who normally attended services only occasionally, found himself paying more attention than usual, aware of Violet beside him and wondering what she thought of the message about building foundations on solid ground. After the service, the congregation gathered outside for a social. Tables had been set up in the shade of a large cottonwood tree, laden with dishes brought by the churchgoers. Violet had insisted on contributing and had spent the previous day baking bread with a recipe she remembered from her mother. "Miss Sullivan, Mrs. Fletcher called, waving them over to where she stood with several other women. "Come meet the Ladies' Aid Society." For the next hour, Violet was drawn into conversation with the women of Clifton while Zachary found himself corralled by the men near the coffee urn. He kept Violet in his sight, noting how she seemed to fit in naturally with the townsfolk, her genuine interest in their lives drawing them out. "She's a fine woman, Vance," Sheriff Collins commented, following Zachary's gaze. "When do you plan to make it official?" Zachary shifted uncomfortably. "When the time is right." "Better not wait too long," Mr. Fletcher advised. "Good women are scarce out here, and she's already caught the eye of that new mining engineer from San Francisco." Zachary looked sharply in Violet's direction, and noticed for the first time that among the group of women was a well-dressed man he didn't recognize, who was indeed paying particular attention to Violet as she spoke. An unfamiliar emotion coursed through him, not quite jealousy, but a fierce protectiveness mixed with something deeper. He had no claim on Violet beyond their tentative agreement. If she chose to consider other options now that she had seen what Clifton had to offer, that was her right. The thought left him cold. "If you'll excuse me," he said abruptly to the men, setting down his coffee cup and moving toward the group where Violet stood. As he approached, he heard the stranger saying, "Would be honored if you would consider the position, Miss Sullivan. The school board is most eager to secure a teacher with your qualifications." Violet was smiling politely, but Zachary could see a certain tension in her posture. "It's very kind of you to offer, Mr. Reynolds, but as I explained, my situation is not yet settled." Zachary reached her side, and she looked up at him with what seemed like relief. "Zachary, this is Mr. Thomas Reynolds. He's recently arrived from San Francisco to manage operations at the North Mine. Mr. Reynolds, this is Zachary Vance." The men shook hands, sizing each other up. Reynolds was younger than Zachary had initially thought, perhaps 30, with the polished manner and tailored clothing of a city man. "Mr. Vance," Reynolds said with a nod. "I was just telling Miss Sullivan that the school board is seeking a new teacher. Her experience would be invaluable." "Indeed," Zachary replied neutrally, though his hand instinctively moved to rest lightly at the small of Violet's back. Violet mentioned she might wish to teach once we're settled. The slight emphasis on "we" was not lost on Reynolds, who glanced between them with new understanding. "I see. Well, the offer remains open should circumstances allow." Mrs. Fletcher, who had been watching the exchange with barely disguised interest, chose that moment to intervene. "Mr. Reynolds, you simply must try Mrs. Patterson's apple cake. It's legendary in these parts." As she led the mining engineer away, Violet turned to Zachary with a questioning look. "Is everything all right? You seem tense." Zachary realized he was still standing rigidly, his hand pressed perhaps too firmly against her back. He relaxed deliberately, letting his hand fall to his side. "I'm fine," he assured her, though the unfamiliar emotion still churned within him. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "Yes, though it's a bit overwhelming to meet so many people at once." She hesitated, then added more softly, "I was glad when you came over." Mr. Reynolds was being rather persistent about the teaching position. "You don't have to accept," Zachary said immediately. "Not if you don't want to." "I know," she replied, her expression thoughtful. "But it is something to consider, isn't it, once our situation is more defined." The careful phrasing reminded him of the uncertainty that still existed between them. They had grown closer over the past 2 weeks, but neither had spoken directly about their future since agreeing to postpone the wedding. "Yes," he agreed, forcing himself to sound calm. "Once things are more defined." The ride home from church was contemplative, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were nearly back at the ranch that Violet broke the silence. "Zachary," she said, her voice soft but determined, "I think perhaps we should talk about our arrangement." His hands tightened on the reins. "What about it?" "It's been 2 weeks since I arrived," she continued. "I'm fully recovered now and we've had time to become acquainted." "Yes," he agreed, unsure where she was heading with this. "I need to know if you still wish to marry me," she said directly, turning to face him, "or if your feelings have changed." The question took him by surprise. "My feelings haven't changed," he replied carefully. "But what about yours? You've seen Clifton now, met the people. There might be other opportunities for you here." The image of Reynolds speaking earnestly to her flashed through his mind. Violet's eyes widened slightly. "You think I'm reconsidering because of Mr. Reynolds' offer?" "It would be understandable," Zachary said, keeping his voice even with effort. "Teaching is your profession. You're good at it, and it would give you independence." "Independence," she repeated, a strange note in her voice. "Is that what you think I want?" "I don't know," he admitted. "We've never discussed what happens if you decide not to go through with the marriage." They had reached the ranch now, and Zachary brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He set the brake and turned to face Violet fully, needing to see her expression. "Zachary," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "I didn't come all the way from Boston for independence. I had that already. I came because I wanted a partner, a home, perhaps eventually a family." She took a deep breath. "I still want those things, with you if you'll have me." The tight knot that had been forming in his chest all day suddenly loosened. "You're sure?" Even knowing what life here would be like. The isolation, the hard work, the simplicity of it all. "I've seen nothing in the past 2 weeks to change my mind," she said softly. "Quite the opposite, in fact." Zachary wanted to reach for her then, to pull her into his arms and show her how deeply her words affected him, but something held him back, a lingering caution born of years of solitude and self-reliance. "Then, I have a proposal," he said instead. "Not the one I originally planned, but one that comes from knowing you now, not just from letters." Violet's eyes never left his face. "I'm listening." "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because it was arranged or because it's practical, but because I think we could build something good together. Something real." The smile that bloomed on her face was radiant. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Vance." This time he did reach for her, his hand covering hers where it rested on the wagon seat. It wasn't an embrace or a kiss, but the touch held promise, a beginning rather than a fulfillment. "When?" he asked. "Soon," she replied. But not today. Today, I'd like to simply enjoy knowing that we've chosen each other, not just agreed to an arrangement." As they walked together toward the house, Zachary felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from his life for longer than he could remember. The ranch, which had been merely a place where he worked and slept for 10 years, had become a home with Violet's arrival. And now it would be their home, built on a foundation of mutual choice rather than convenience. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, on a crisp November morning with the desert hills painted in the soft gold of autumn light. Pastor Wilson performed the ceremony in the small Clifton church, with Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Miller standing as witnesses. Violet wore a simple dress of deep blue that she had altered from one of her Boston gowns, with wildflowers Zachary had gathered that morning tucked into her hair. The words they spoke were traditional, but both felt the weight of their meaning in a way they might not have if they had married immediately upon Violet's arrival. When Zachary placed the plain gold ring on Violet's finger, a ring he had ridden all the way to Tucson to purchase, his hands were steady, but his heart raced with the significance of the moment. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Wilson declared. "You may kiss your bride." Zachary had thought about this moment, their first kiss, with increasing frequency over the past weeks. Now, looking into Violet's upturned face, her green eyes bright with emotion, he felt both nervousness and certainty. He leaned down, his hand gently cradling her cheek, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief but tender, a promise of more to come. The small reception that followed at Rose's Cafe was lively, with most of the town turning out to congratulate the new couple. Mr. Fletcher made a toast. Mrs. Patterson shed a few surreptitious tears that she quickly blamed on dust, and even Mr. Reynolds approached them with genuine good wishes. "The school board's loss is your gain, Mr. Vance," he said, shaking Zachary's hand firmly. "Though the offer remains open for Mrs. Vance should she wish to teach part-time." "Thank you," Violet replied warmly. "I may consider it once we're settled." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Patterson pressed a package into Violet's hands. "Wedding gift," she said gruffly. "Something to make your new home more comfortable." On the ride back to their ranch, Zachary found himself stealing glances at Violet, still hardly believing that this remarkable woman was now his wife. The gold band on her finger caught the afternoon sunlight, as did the matching one on his own hand. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Vance?" he asked, the new title feeling both strange and right on his tongue. Violet smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "That it's been a rather unconventional courtship, from fever to wedding in just a month. Do you regret that?" "The unconventional part," she shook her head decisively. "Not at all. I think it may have been exactly what we needed." "How so?" "Well," she said thoughtfully, "if I had arrived healthy, we might have married right away as strangers following a practical arrangement. Instead, I had to nurse you through the night," he finished for her, "and we had time to know each other first." "Exactly." She reached over to touch his hand where it held the reins. "It may not be the most romantic beginning, but it's ours, and I wouldn't change it." Zachary's throat tightened with emotion. "Nor would I." When they reached the ranch, Zachary helped Violet down from the wagon, but instead of setting her on her feet, he kept his arms around her, lifting her in a traditional carrying of the bride across the threshold. Violet laughed in surprise, her arms going around his neck. "Zachary, I'm not an invalid anymore. You don't need to carry me." "Humor me," he said, smiling down at her as he carried her up the porch steps. "It's our wedding day, after all." Inside, the house had been transformed. In the days leading up to the wedding, they had worked together to make the space truly theirs. New curtains sewn from the calico Violet had selected hung in the windows, giving the rooms a warmer feel. The furniture had been rearranged to be more conversational, and Violet's few possessions from Boston had been integrated with Zachary's, creating a home that reflected both of them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Zachary said as he set her gently on her feet in the sitting room. Violet's smile was radiant as she looked up at him. "It feels like home already." That evening, after a simple wedding supper they had prepared together the day before, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. Zachary's arm was around Violet's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing at the landscape. "I never imagined such colors could exist in nature." "The desert reveals itself slowly," Zachary replied. "When I first arrived, I saw only the harshness. It took time to appreciate the beauty." Violet turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps that's true of many things worth knowing." He met her gaze, understanding her meaning. "Perhaps it is." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast desert sky, Zachary led his wife inside. There was nervousness between them now, an awareness of what was to come, but also a deep trust built over the weeks of getting to know each other. Later, in the quiet darkness of what was now their bedroom, Zachary held Violet close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. Their coming together had been tender and hesitant at first, then increasingly confident as they learned each other in this new way. "Are you all right?" he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "More than all right," she assured him, her voice soft in the darkness. "I'm exactly where I want to be." As Violet drifted toward sleep in his arms, Zachary reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. When he had sent away for a mail-order bride, he had been seeking a practical solution to his solitude, a partnership based on mutual need rather than deeper emotion. What he had found instead, what they had built together, was something far more precious, a love born of compassion, respect, and genuine choice. It had begun with a fever on a train platform, but it had grown into something neither of them had dared to hope for when they first exchanged letters. Zachary pressed a gentle kiss to his sleeping wife's forehead, gratitude filling his heart. Sometimes, he realized, the most unexpected beginnings led to the most perfect endings. In the years that followed, Zachary and Violet Vance built a life together that neither could have imagined on that October day when she arrived in Clifton with a fever. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Zachary's knowledge of cattle and the land, combined with Violet's organizational skills and fresh perspectives, led to innovations that increased both their herd and their profits. The garden expanded under Violet's attentive hand, and the house gradually transformed from a bachelor's practical shelter to a true home filled with books, music, and warmth. Violet did eventually take up teaching again, though not as Mr. Reynolds had originally proposed. Instead, she began offering lessons at the ranch 3 afternoons a week for the children of nearby homesteaders who lived too far from town to attend the Clifton school regularly. What started as a small class of 5 students grew over time as word spread of Mrs. Vance's excellent teaching. Zachary built a small schoolhouse adjacent to their home, using lumber he hauled from Tucson and windows salvaged from an abandoned mining office. He took quiet pride in watching Violet in her element, guiding young minds with the same patient determination she brought to everything she did. Their first child, a son they named William after Zachary's father, was born a year and a half after their wedding. The birth was difficult, with Dr. Miller and Mrs. Patterson both attending, but when Zachary finally held his son in his arms, the tiny face so like Violet's in its delicate features, he felt a love so overwhelming it brought him to his knees beside the bed. "He's perfect," he whispered, carefully placing the swaddled infant in Violet's arms. Just like his mother, Violet, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him. "He has your chin, I think, and hopefully your strength." Their daughter Sarah arrived 2 years later, entering the world with a lusty cry that, according to Mrs. Patterson, indicated she would be a force to reckon with. Mark my words. The prediction proved accurate as Sarah grew into a spirited, curious child who followed her father around the ranch from the moment she could walk, asking endless questions about the cattle, the land, and the sky above. Family life suited Zachary in ways he had never anticipated. The man who had spent 10 years in solitude discovered in himself a talent for storytelling as he held his children on his lap in the evening, spinning tales of his journey west, the animals of the desert, and occasionally, when they asked, the story of how their mother had arrived with a fever and he had nursed her through the night. "And then you fell in love?" William would ask, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it again. "Not right away," Zachary would reply, his eyes meeting Violet's across the room. "The best things sometimes take a little time." Life was not without its challenges. The drought of 1889 nearly destroyed their cattle operation, forcing them to drive the herd to distant pastures and live off their savings until the rains finally returned. Scarlet fever swept through Clifton in 1892, and though their children were spared, Violet worked alongside Dr. Miller, using her experience with illness to help nurse the town's children, returning home exhausted each night to be held in Zachary's strong arms. Through it all, their partnership deepened, the initial attraction and tentative affection growing into a love that was as essential and enduring as the desert itself. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, how to support one another in difficult times, and how to celebrate the joys that came their way. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Violet with a small piano he had arranged to have shipped from Tucson. It had cost a small fortune and had required careful planning to transport to the ranch without her knowledge, but the look on her face when she saw it made every difficulty worthwhile. "How did you know?" she asked, tears in her eyes as she ran her fingers reverently over the keys. "You mentioned once that you used to play in Boston," he replied, "that you missed music. I thought it was time our home had some." That night, for the first time in years, Violet played, her fingers remembering the skills she had learned as a girl. The music filled their home, a new brightness added to the life they had built together. As William and Sarah grew, they too learned to play, their mother's patient instruction resulting in duets and family concerts that became a tradition on Sunday evenings. Zachary never learned to play himself, but he loved to listen, watching his family with a contentment that sometimes overwhelmed him with its completeness. In 1900, 15 years after Violet had arrived in Clifton, Arizona Territory became simply Arizona, and changes came to the region. The copper mines expanded, bringing more people to Clifton. The railroad added new lines, making travel easier. A proper hospital was built in town, with Dr. Miller as its chief physician. The Vance Ranch expanded as well. They were able to purchase adjacent land when old Mr. Henderson decided to return east, doubling the size of their operation. William, now 13 and showing his father's aptitude for ranching, took on increasing responsibility with the cattle. Sarah, at 11, divided her interests between helping her mother with the school and accompanying her father and brother on rides around the property. "You ever miss Boston?" Zachary asked Violet one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset just as they had on their wedding night all those years ago. Violet considered the question, her hand resting comfortably in his. "Sometimes I miss certain things about it, the libraries, the concerts, the changing of the seasons. But no, I don't miss Boston itself." She turned to look at him, the lines around her eyes and the few strands of silver in her dark hair only adding to her beauty in his view. "Everything I truly need is here. Even with all the hardships, the drought, the fever, the isolation, especially with those," she said firmly, "they showed us what we're capable of together." She squeezed his hand. "Why do you ask? Do you regret bringing me here?" "Never," he replied immediately. "Not for a single moment. I just want to be sure that you've had the life you hoped for when you answered my advertisement." Violet's smile was radiant in the fading light. "Zachary Vance, I've had a far better life than I ever dared to hope for. I came seeking security and companionship. What I found was a true partner, a love deeper than I knew was possible, and a family that brings me joy every day." She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder just as it had from the first. "And it all began because I arrived with a fever, and you nursed me through the night." "Best decision I ever made," Zachary murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. As darkness fell over the desert they both had come to love, Zachary reflected on the journey they had shared. From strangers bound by an agreement to partners bound by love, they had built something enduring on that unexpected foundation, a life rich with purpose, joy, and meaning. The fever that had seemed a misfortune had been, in fact, their greatest blessing, giving them the time and circumstances to discover each other truly before committing their lives together. In nursing Violet through that long night 15 years ago, Zachary had begun to heal his own solitary heart, opening himself to a future brighter than he had ever imagined possible. And as the stars emerged above their home, Zachary and Violet Vance sat together in the peaceful certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be, with exactly the person they were meant to find.